Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be doing a hypothetical 2024 presidential election matchup between incumbent President Joe Biden and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Now, of course, I'll preface this by saying this is all hypothetical. In this hypothetical scenario, Nikki Haley miraculously, and it would be miraculously, somehow wins the Republican nomination and becomes the Republicans' nominee in 2024. And Joe Biden, who is already president, decides to run again. He takes another shot at the top office. Now, the states I've already filled out are the safe states for either candidate. Of course, the safe Republican states are states that Nikki Haley can count on winning by around 12 points or more. Likewise, the safe blue states are the states Joe Biden can count on winning by 12 points or more. So to explain a few of these safe calls, Colorado, which we're not really going to talk about much in this video, went to Joe Biden the last presidential election by over 13 percentage points. And that was mostly due to the dramatic shifts we saw really in most of Colorado, but particularly the Denver area and the Denver suburbs. Some of the margins in the suburbs are, things you'd see in more urban counties, really. 61-36 margins, plus 16-point margins in favor of Democrats. It certainly is the reason why Colorado, I would say, going forward is no longer in play for the Republicans in 2024. So that's why Colorado is safe blue. As for South Carolina, this is Nikki Haley's state, her home state, rather. In 2020, Donald Trump won this state by a little under 12 points. However, I think Nikki Haley can certainly improve on Trump's margins, especially in places like Columbia and Charleston, more urban areas, as she is a more moderate Republican, would be able to appeal to people more in the suburbs and the urbanized centers of the state. So we're going to start west to east as we normally do in these videos and start to take a look at the state of Nevada. Keep in mind this prediction is not going to take into account running mates, as I have not even thought about that yet. So if we look at the state of Nevada, actually before we do that, we're going to take a look at Joe Biden's current job approval rating. The latest poll has him from Gallup at around 54%. I'm sure it's somewhere in that range. It's not terribly high, but it's certainly fairly good to be above the majority. But approval rating is different than favorability. Joe Biden's favorability rating is 48%, when in comparison to the past, that's actually a very good favorability. In fact, he's never really been favorable since looks like early 2020 or even before that. But he certainly is closing the gap, and it looks like the areas are about to overlap. So again, that plays somewhat of a factor, certainly, in whether a incumbent president will be reelected. So we're going to look at the state of Nevada. In 2020, Nevada was the only state, battleground state, that went to Hillary Clinton in 2016 that trended more Republican in 2020. Joe Biden won this state by 2.4%. It was certainly not one of the closest states, but it was certainly a very close state in the election. And what's crucial about Nevada in particular is that while some of the western portion of the state trended more Democratic, Clark County, which is basically where the vast majority of the state lives, trended more Republican. In fact, Joe Biden only won it by 9 points. The 2016 election, in which Hillary Clinton wins Nevada by around 11 points, Clark County by 11 points. And if we want to go even further to an incumbent's re-election, we can go to 2012, and we're really reaching back here. But Obama won Clark County by 15 points. So it really goes to show you Clark County has been narrowing up, and as a result, the state has been narrowing up. And there's a number of reasons for that. If we look at the precinct map from the 2020 election, again, some of these states we're not going to be able to do this with because it's not totally filled out, although I don't really think it should impact us based on the states we're going to be looking at. But the Las Vegas area in particular, most of the inner city trended a lot more Republican. Now, whether that was due to Trump's messaging, Joe Biden's unfavorability, there's a multitude of factors. However, nonetheless, Nevada still stayed Democratic, and I think a candidate like Nikki Haley, who is more of a sort of establishment, I guess, neoconservative type Republican, more of the old guard, while that worked in Nevada in the past, certainly 2000 and 2004, I think in our modern day political dynamic. I don't think Nikki Haley can drum up the enthusiasm in a state like Nevada to actually win it, even though the state is trending more Republican. So I actually would give that state to Joe Biden, probably around 2 or 3 points, but nonetheless still going to the current president. Arizona is another state that's going to be really close in the 2024 election. If we go back to 2020, it was one of the closest states this entire election, and that was mainly because the Maricopa County, which is the most populous county in Arizona, went to the Democrat. It went to Joe Biden, which ultimately won him the entire state at large. Again, both candidates performed over their party's 2016 showings. However, Trump only overperformed his previous showing by around a little bit over a point, 1.2%. Joe Biden almost 4.5 points about over Hillary Clinton's performance. And again, if we look at the trends in Arizona from 2012 to 2016, Maricopa County shifting dramatically to the left. And that was continued in the 2020 election by moving 5 points more in favor of the Democrats, giving them the state of Arizona. One thing I will say about Arizona is, based on the 2018 midterm results, while the arguably the most important election, the Senate election, went to the Democrats, the governorship remained firmly in Republican hands. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot. Doug Ducey was the incumbent governor, and he was fairly popular. But if we look at, for a second, the other statewide races, the attorney general, for instance, was able to hold on by around 4 points in a blue wave year, while the open Senate seat between Kyrsten Sinema and Martha McSally was won by Kyrsten Sinema. And if we look at the difference, we have Maricopa County going 52-47 in this race for attorney general, and then 51-46. Arizona is going to be super, super close, but I think definitely with kind of the McCainite conservatism still being popular in the state, I think Nikki Haley, being a more moderate Republican, would actually be able to eke out a win in the state. I think it would be very, very close, like it was in 2020. However, I think it would tilt in the other direction. I think Nikki Haley would have the slight advantage. New Mexico I just have on here because it's not going to be safe. It's going to be likely. For some reason, New Mexico, even though it's, I guess, technically a safe blue state, as it really doesn't deviate from that, the margins are never really safe margins. I mean, this time around, Joe Biden won the state by around 10 or so, a little bit under 10 points, 9.8 to be specific. 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by 8.3%. And if we go back to even 2012, Obama won this state, by a little less than 9 points. It's around, 10 points, around 9.9%. So even though New Mexico, I guess you could categorize as safe blue, technically, margin-wise, it's not really safe, but nonetheless, it will still go to Joe Biden, no problem. Texas will be really interesting to look at, too, because Texas went to Donald Trump by over 5 points this time around. And the reason for that was mainly the Rio Grande Valley trending heavily Republican, in some cases 40, 50, 30% more Republican. Now, these counties don't have a whole lot of people. I mean, sure, maybe Cameron County, McAllen County, these other areas have a lot of people. Did I say McAllen? Wherever McAllen is, Hidalgo County. Some of these counties do have a lot of people, some not so much, but compared to the Dallas-Fort Worth or the Houston area, they're not really population centers. It will be an interesting dynamic, certainly since Nikki Haley is more of a moderate Republican compared to the Trump wing that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years. And the reason that's significant, I think, is because it's going to energize a certain base in Texas. Donald Trump was able to energize the border Latino communities down here along the border, as well as some rural areas, but mainly the border regions. He won massive margins, unlike Republicans have ever seen in this area since the 1920s. However, there were still significant gains in the Dallas-Fort Worth suburbs, and of course Houston, although Houston didn't really move all that much, and Montgomery County did move around 7 points, which is significant but Harris County itself, which is home to Houston, only moved 1 point in favor of Democrats. So perhaps that's a signal that the bluing of Texas is slowing down. Perhaps. But the Dallas-Fort Worth area is still trending wildly Democratic, and I don't really see that shifting. Nikki Haley is going to have trouble, I think, keeping the enthusiasm in the border communities, because I think Trump certainly tapped into a certain energy, particularly on issues of immigration and probably crime as well. But nonetheless, I think I think Nikki Haley will probably improve in the suburbs. So I think we're going to see roughly a similar margin, probably around 5 or 6 points in 2024. I think they're going to even out. I think you're going to see less enthusiasm in the border region, but you're also going to see some of these suburbs slow down, I guess, their blue transformation. But again, Nikki Haley is going to attract a certain type of voter to her. Minnesota, we're not going to discuss too much. Nikki Haley is more of a moderate candidate, but I think what really shifted Donald Trump's better showing in Minnesota back in 2016 were the rural areas, coal country, mining country, over here in the western part of the state. I don't think Nikki Haley has that same populist kind of vibe or energy to her. I think she appeals more to the Minneapolis suburbs, and I think ultimately it's not really going to show her any favorable results. So I think we're going to see a Minnesota margin that is around 9 or 10 points in favor of Joe Biden. I think she'll do slightly worse than Trump. And the reason I say that is because no other Republican in the past has really been able to win Minnesota. You know, George W. Bush, the McCain, the Romneys were never able to really make it that close in Minnesota. And Nikki Haley does not seem like the candidate to me that would be able to really significantly decrease the margin. Iowa, I think Nikki Haley won't have a problem winning by around a likely margin. Probably will be around similar to the margin we saw in the 2020 election with Donald Trump. It could be a little bit more, could be a little less, depending on which areas she's able to energize. She might do better in places like Polk County and Cedar Rapids, and she might do slightly worse in the rural parts of the state. However, I don't think Iowa is under serious contention, considering its red shift seems to be, at least in the near future, a permanent thing, similar to Ohio, as we'll get to. I think both of these states are kind of going to stay voting Republican for the foreseeable future. They're, similar to the shifts we've seen in Virginia and Colorado, former swing states that were all Bush states in 2004. Nebraska's second, I think would actually be tilt Nikki Haley. I just think she has a good suburban appeal. If we look at the 2020 election in particular, Donald Trump did pretty poorly in the 2nd district. He lost it by around 7 points to Joe Biden. I think that really speaks to Joe Biden's strength in not just urban areas, but of course suburban areas. And that applies all across the country, not just suburban areas in the Northeast or even the Mid-Atlantic, but all across the entire country. Joe Biden performed very well in the suburbs for a Democrat. And that, of course, is a worrying trend for Republicans going forward because more and more people in the United States are moving to urban and suburban areas. The rural parts of the country are shrinking. Those are Republican strong suit, and that is certainly a worrying trend for them if they want to win presidential elections in the future. Taking a look at Nebraska, though, if we go back to 2016, they don't have the result on here, but Donald Trump won Nebraska's second by around 2 points. And in 2012, Romney, I think, won it by a similar margin. I think that's unlikely to change. I think Nikki Haley would be able to win back Nebraska's second, probably by 2 or 3 points, a similar margin to the others, but we'll put it as tilt for now. Wisconsin is another state that's going to be super, super close in the 2024 election. A lot of people coming to this state. If we look at the last election back in November, Joe Biden won Wisconsin by 0.6. It's actually a smaller margin than Trump won it back in 2016. He won it by 0.7 roughly. So ultimately, basically the same margin, just the other way around. If we look at Joe Biden's strength, it was in the WOW counties around Milwaukee, and of course it was some in the northern part of the state. Of course, Trump still did better in the Southwest, which was formerly a swing region, now seems to be a lean Republican region. But, places like Madison trending 5 points in favor of Democrats. Some of these even smaller counties, Green Bay in particular, trending around 3.5%. The only swing county that trended to the right was Kenosha, and I think part of that probably had to do with the civil unrest we saw back in August there. But again, there's a certain type of base that is energized in Wisconsin with a more populist right candidate, I suppose, with Trump. I think Nikki Haley, while she'll certainly improve in the wow counties of Wisconsin, I don't think she's going to have the turnout or the strength in these rural areas that's required. Because again, in 2012, Republicans ran on a strategy essentially of Obama bad, and that was kind of the strategy that happened in 2020 with Trump. Except with Trump, I guess Corona and civil unrest, it was just enough to actually win the presidency. But I don't think it's going to be enough to beat Joe Biden in 2024. So I think while Wisconsin, I think it will be close, I think Joe Biden is still going to win Wisconsin. Probably by more than he did last time against Nikki Haley. I wouldn't be surprised if it was around 1.5%, even 2 points. Michigan is probably going to be similar. I think Michigan would probably go to Joe Biden by around 4 points or so. Again, if we just look at 2020, if these trends continue in even these rural areas, it is troubling for Republicans. Now, I think Nikki Haley, her strength will be the suburbs, but her fault is going to be probably the deep urban areas and the rural parts of the state. Not that she's going to do terrible in them, but she's going to do bad enough that it's going to offset any gains she has in the suburbs. So I would think that Michigan would also go blue. Ohio, I think, is probably going to be likely red as well. I would put lean, but by 2024, I think Ohio is going to be an even redder state than we see today, and thus I think Nikki Haley has the potential to win it anywhere from around 7 to 9 points, similar to what we saw in this election. Again, Ohio could trend even more red, so maybe she would win it by 12 or 13, but again, I think there are enough urban centers in Ohio to kind of keep it, in the single digits, maybe a low double digit range, but not really anything more than that. Again, she would probably do well in a place like Delaware County, which trended 9 points in favor of Joe Biden. Union County and Franklin County, these suburban and urban counties, I think she would do slightly better in. I think her weak spot would be Northeast Ohio, which used to be blue, was first won by Trump back in 2016. He actually did better in 2020 in these northeastern counties. I don't think Nikki Haley would really excite these blue-collar kind of manufacturing base that you have up here. Nonetheless, I think it would split the difference, and you'd essentially see a similar margin. Going up to Maine, I think Maine at large would definitely be likely Biden. Donald Trump lost the state of Maine by around 9 points. I think Nikki Haley would probably lose it by around 11, maybe even 12 points, considering that Nikki Haley probably would do poorly. I think in New England overall, I don't think she really excites the more populist base in places like Maine and New Hampshire. So New Hampshire I would also give to Joe Biden, probably by a lean margin, maybe a low likely margin of around 7 or 8 points or so. I don't think New Hampshire is going to be safe or anything like that, but it's certainly, I think she would perform worse than even Trump did. Just because I don't think she brings out the hardcore, rural, super socially conservative base that helped Trump win in 2016. Maine second, we'll probably give to Haley by a lean margin. I just think the rural-urban divide is stark enough that even a candidate like Nikki Haley, who's definitely more on the moderate side, would probably still do well in this particular rural part of the state. Moving on down to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's seen a string of Republican victories recently. There were some ballot measures that were proposed by the Republicans to limit, I believe, governor's powers on lockdowns, and I might make a separate video on that. That was a few days ago, which was, again, a low turnout victory, but the Republicans got the result they were looking for. Also in 2020, not only did the state, I think it was treasurer, lose his re-election, but the state auditor's seat, I don't think they have it here on New York Times, went to the Republicans. So those were two Republican pickups, the Auditor General, that's it, and the Treasurer. These were both two races that Republicans picked up, despite Donald Trump winning the state at large. Another thing I'd point out is Republicans won the popular vote in the House seats, the House elections in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is certainly trending, I think, long-term more Republican, But in the short term, again, I don't think Nikki Haley is the type of candidate. I think Joe Biden would hold on to Pennsylvania, but it would still be relatively close. I think it would probably be by around 1.5 or so, maybe 2 points. But I think similar to Wisconsin, I think you're not going to have the turnout required to win the entire state in these counties, these rural counties. She'd probably do better in Chester County, probably do better in Montgomery, Bucks County, maybe Lehigh County, but places like Monroe County, Luzerne County, Lackawanna, Scranton, these areas, I think she would do worse in. So while she would do better in the collar counties around Philadelphia, she'd probably do worse in northeastern PA, which was Trump's strength in 2016. One of the reasons he was able to win the state is because he was able to win places like Northampton County by nearly 4 points. He brought Monroe County to less than a point difference, which if we just go back to 2012, Monroe County had been a safe blue county for Obama. Luzerne County was a +5 win for Obama. For Trump, it was nearly +20. In the 2020 election, Trump won it by a lesser margin, but he still won it by around 14 points, which is pretty, I think that's not going to change under Nikki Haley. I just think you're going to see some trade-offs and some turnout differences. Virginia, I think, is still going to stay likely blue. Probably going to Joe Biden by around, again, like 10, 11 points. I don't know if you're going to see a dramatic blue turn because, again, in a state like Virginia, you're going to see a trade-off where Nikki Haley is probably going to perform a little bit better in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, Fairfax, Prince William, Loudoun counties. Maybe do better here in the Hampton Roads area. But I think in the western part of the state, she's going to do worse. And the central part of the state, I think she's not going to be able to keep up. Not that Virginia's really going to be that competitive, but one of the reasons I don't have it in the safe category is because as far as I've seen, the trends going blue are not nearly as dramatic as the trends in Colorado. And I don't think Virginia is going to be a +12 Democratic state by 2024. I think it's going to be somewhat similar. But by 2028, I think certainly Virginia will probably be a safe blue state unless things change. North Carolina is interesting because it used to vote along with Virginia many, many times in the past. One thing to note about North Carolina is it's a lot more rural than Virginia, which is one of the reasons why it is red and Virginia is not. Virginia is just much more urbanized. Its population is much more compacted in these areas like the D.C. suburbs, the Richmond, and the Hampton Roads area. While North Carolina certainly has its urban centers, it's by percentage of population, there's a less amount of people living in these suburbs and cities than there are in the rural parts of the state, which is one of the reasons why North Carolina, again, is a redder state than Virginia. That being said, I think Nikki Haley will hold on to the state of North Carolina, similar to how Trump was able to hold on to it in 2020, albeit Trump only won it by 1.3. I think Nikki Haley might improve, but I think it'll be around a 1.6 margin for her. I just don't really see a dramatic shift in many of the urban areas. She'll probably slow down the bluing in places like Charlotte a little bit, Raleigh, these other areas. While she'll perform worse in rural areas, I don't think it's going to be by that much because I think these areas that have trended red are probably going to stay red to some degree, and I think overall it's going to keep the state red. Georgia, on the other hand, I think is going to be different. The trends in Georgia, I think, are so dramatic in the Atlanta suburbs area, and I don't see that stopping, especially with what we saw in the special elections. I think Joe Biden will easily win the state of Georgia. I mean, it will still be close, but I think it'll be around a 3 or 4 point margin in this case, because even with Nikki Haley being a more moderate Republican compared to somebody like Trump, both in policy and rhetoric, I think these blue Atlanta suburban counties are here to stay. I don't think those are going anywhere. I think Georgia is basically on track to be the new Virginia or the new Illinois even in the more distant future. So I think Georgia would probably go to Joe Biden similarly to how it did in 2020. Finally, we go to the state of Florida. I think Florida, based on the 2020 election, Donald Trump was able to improve massively in the state of Florida, in places like Miami-Dade, Central Florida. He did a little bit worse in Jacksonville and some of the urban areas, but overall he did much better in the state. He won it by a similar margin that George Bush won the state back in 2004. The question is, for somebody like Nikki Haley, will she be able to keep this momentum? Will she be able to hold Florida? I don't know. It seems at this point Florida is a red state, so I think regardless, Nikki Haley would probably be able to carry it. However, I think it would be a little bit closer. I think she'd probably only win it by 1.5 points, similarly to the Trump margin we saw back in 2016. But in terms of the trends among Hispanic Cuban voters in Florida, I don't really see that going away anytime soon. I think Florida, for now, is going to be at least a tilt or even lean Republican state. And that certainly does benefit the Republicans, particularly in Florida. But it's not enough to win the election, however. This would put Joe Biden at 291 electoral votes to 247. Again, this is all obviously very speculative, and there's certainly some states you could certainly debate going one way or the other. But I think this is a fairly accurate consensus of what possibly could happen in a Nikki Haley-Joe Biden matchup. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a like under this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Comment down below. As always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.